friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 12 of my 2022 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Furry and Bright and Joy to All. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my pups and I'm going to make them look like beagles. So I'm going to color all three of them the same, just with very, very slight differences. And for the brown parts of their body, I decided to go with E31, E33, and E35. These are really warm brown tones. They have kind of like a yellowish undertone, which makes them really warm and cozy. And so I thought those would be a good match for little beagle pups. So I'm starting with the first little guy, laying in the E35 first for those shadows down the back of his body. Since he's facing toward the right, I'm going to put his shadows on the left, and then I blend it out with the E33, and then I'm using the E31 to kind of outline where I want those brown parts to end, and then filling in any of the white space between those lines. So it's a little bit trickier than just coloring them a solid color, but really not too bad, and it really is fun to try to mimic a breed that you love. I've never had a beagle, but I do think they're really cute, and it's definitely a breed that has a very distinctive look to it, so it's kind of fun to try to mimic that with your Copic coloring. So I've moved on to my second little guy, and I'm basically flip-flopping the way that I'm coloring. Since he's facing toward the left, I'm going to put my shadows down the right side of his body so that I can have that highlight on his face, which is just how I prefer to color. I like to keep those features really visible, especially the eyes. I just feel like the eyes are such an essential part of a living creature to make them look expressive. So I want to make sure that those are really visible. So I'm just going to do all the brown parts of these beagles at once. That way I don't have to switch back and forth between combos for each of these pups. And then I'll go back and add the details in steps as well. So I'm moving on to my third little guy, and this one is a bit trickier because he's facing sideways, but his head is turned to the opposite direction of his body. So I have to shade his head on the left-hand side, down the back of his head, and then his body down the right-hand side. So it just took a second to kind of like figure out where the light source should be for him. He's going to be kind of in the middle of the card, so if I'm going for a central light source, which I am on this one, it's going to be an indoor scene, so it would just be like overhead lighting. You know, I just wanted to make sure that his face stays nice and light like I already explained. So next I'm going to do the ears, and I wanted to go with a bit of a darker brown just to make them look even more distinctive. So I decided to go with E25, E27, and E29. That E29 is what I am laying in first, and this time instead of switching back and forth between, doing one dog at a time, I'm just going to do all three at once because I'm just doing that small little area of their ears. So E29 first, then blend it out with the E27, and I'm saving a little bit of room for that E25 on the tips of the ears, on the forward part of the ears, where the light would be hitting it, keeping it consistent with how I've colored the face. And then I wanted to work on the little black patches on their back. So I decided to go with my toner grays for that. I think you could probably use any of the grays, but this one is kind of like a nice mix between warm and cool, so I thought it just would work well. So I'm using T3, T5, and T7. Started with the T7 along the back, and then I'm blending out with the T5, and then I'm taking the T3 and kind of overlapping into the brown areas and using that softer gray so that it kind of like melds with those browns as it dries back, and you don't get a harsh line at the edge. If you do end up with a harsh line, if you don't use this exact combo, you could go back over the edges with the lightest of your browns again. And then I'm going to just take the E30 to add a little bit of like a creamy shade to the white parts of the body, just so they also have some definition and some shadows there. I'm also kind of bridging some of the transitions between the brown and the white part of the body with that E30. While I have that marker out, I'm also going to color the antlers on that little reindeer hat, and my E30 started to leak, so I just pulled off the other cap to equalize the pressure in the barrel, and then continued coloring. And I decided it was looking a little flat, so I added in a bit of E31 as well. And then for the base of the hat, I'm going to switch to another brown combo because I didn't want it to look like the same fur as the dog's. I wanted it to look like it was made out of felt or something else. So I went with E53, E55, and E57. And I just colored that with the shadows on the outside edges and the highlight in the center. And then I'm just going to finish with all my neutrals. So I'm going to go ahead and do the gingerbread man now as well. I'm just using E13 and E15. He's really small, so 2 colors was probably enough. I probably should have thrown in a third just for my taste, but instead I just went back over with a second layer to make those shadows really stand out. And then I'm going to give my little pups some rosy cheeks. I'm using RV10 and RV11 and just blending that into their fur so that they look really nice and cheerful. Alright, so now I'm going to start adding in some more color, moving away from these neutral tones and adding this festive look with these colors. So I'm going to use R29, R24, and R22 for my reds. I'm going to do 4 colors on my string of lights, so that's why I just kind of skipped 3 in the middle. I'm also going to color every other stripe on my candy cane. I'm going to do one of the dots on the gingerbread man's belly, his little buttons, and then the center stripe on that ornament that's just sitting on its side there. I am also going to do one of the Christmas ribbons on the gifts. I'm going to do the larger of the 2 with that, putting that R29 down at the bottom, and then also on those loops of the bow where they are gathered together, because where they're gathered is where the light would not be able to hit in. And then I'm going to blend out with the R24 and finish with the R22 on that. And then I decided to also color the second gift to have the wrapping paper be red. So I ended up with more red than any of the other combos, but I think it's just so festive and classic, and also red and brown go really well together, so that's why I decided to just have more of the images be red. Then I'm going to move on to yellow, and for that I'm using Y13, Y15, and Y17, and I will do the light bulbs that follow the red on the strand. And I also did the other button on the gingerbread man with yellow, and then I'm going to come back to this combo later on. I wasn't sure which of the other items I wanted to be yellow, so I just kind of waited. Moving on to some greens, I'm going to use G14, G16, and G29, and I will do the light bulbs that follow the yellow in the string. And then I'm also going to do the large Christmas gift, starting with that G29 down at the bottom. That G29 is really dark, so I was trying not to use too much of it. I probably could have also put a shadow on the lower part of the lid, but I just felt like it was going to get too dark if I did that, so I ended up just sticking it at the top where that bow would be casting a shadow. Then I blended that out with the G16, and then I used the G14 to fill the rest in for the highlight. So once I'm done with the green, I'm actually going to move on to blue next. And for that, I'm using B24, B26, and B29, which is a nice bright blue. And I'm going to do the last two bulbs on the string of lights. And then I almost did the other bow, but I changed my mind and decided to do the Christmas ornament and also the dog bowl at the bottom. So for the dog bowl, I'm putting that B29 on both sides and then blending in with the B26, and then I'll use the B24 for the highlight. And then for the Christmas ornament, I decided to kind of mix it up because I didn't want the shadows to be super dark since it's such a small object. So I put the B29 on one side, the B26 on the opposite side, and then blended with the B24 in between, since a round object would have that highlight in the center. So then I'm going to go back to that yellow combo. Like I said, I'm going to use Y13, Y15, and Y17 to do the other bow on the gift, just so I can have that yellow somewhere else in the scene represented as well. Then I'll use T0 to add a little bit of color to the top of the ornament and also to the white stripes on the candy cane, and then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to take one of the Let It Shine Starry Skies pattern paper pieces. I'm going to use this kind of tan print with the little stars. That's going to be the wallpaper in my scene. And then I'm using some light brown wood grain cardstock, and that's going to be the floor. I die cut both of those with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables. I'm going to glue the wood grain piece to the bottom of the pattern paper. And then I trimmed down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock just because the Bristol is a little bit off-white, and that's what I wanted in this scene. I'm going to add that right over the seam so that becomes the baseboard in this little room. And it's slightly too long, but that's fine. I'm just making sure it's nice and straight, using my grid mat to make sure that that's on there straight. And then I'm going to trim off any excess on both of those sides. So next I needed to work on my sentiment. I'm taking a piece of Barn Red cardstock, and I'm going to use Finley's ABCs to spell out my sentiment. And I wanted to do a little play on words. So instead of holidays, I'm doing howlidays. So I'm just taking all of those letters and placing them as close together as I can, and then taping them down with a bit of Post-it tape so that they won't shift and run into each other when I'm running them through my die cutting machine. I'm also going to take the letter I and cut that out 3 times. So one will be the I, one will be an exclamation point, and then one I'm going to cut down to be a dash. I'm going to take a piece of ground coffee cardstock and prep that with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool. And then I'm taking a sentiment from Ho Ho Holidays, and I am selectively stamping that by masking off the word holidays with a piece of Post-it tape, and then inking that up with Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grips a hold of that embossing powder. I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold and there's enough surface area for the powder to stick. And then I'm going to coat it with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder. And I will tap off any excess. And then I'm going to get my heat gun hot over to the side for maybe 30 seconds. Bring it to the back of that cardstock and then to the front until it is all nice and melted. And then I also wanted to work on my card base. So I am stamping on the inside of a speckled eggshell card base, and I am doing that with lobster ink, and the sentiment and images are all from Furry and Bright. I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure I get a nice impression there, and then I'm going to pop that out of my MISTI, and now I'm ready to start assembling. So I'm going to attach the background piece to the front of my card just using some liquid glue, using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. and I'm going to make sure that that is the front of the card, and then glue that down into place. So I get a little bit of a border that kind of acts as a frame for this little scene. And then I'll bring in my images. And because the glue that I'm using dries super fast, I like to lay out my images and kind of get an idea of how the scene is going to look before I commit. So my idea was to have this one little dog that has his feet up, kind of propped on one of the gifts, and then the other dog that is sitting up is going to be in front of his little dog bowl. So I'm just figuring out the placement of those guys, and once I know where I want them, I can glue them down. And so I'm starting with the dog that's sitting up over on the right hand side, and then I'll put the dog bowl just in front of him, kind of overlapping that baseboard a bit. And then I'm going to add the gift next, so it will be under the feet of the second dog. So I'll add him so his feet are kind of propped up on it. And then I have my third little dog, and he's going to be running across the center down at the bottom. So I'll put him kind of overlapping that green gift a bit. That kind of pushes that green gift back and gives the scene some depth. And then I'm going to add the string of lights so that it looks like he's holding that in his mouth and kind of dragging it along behind him, getting into a tiny bit of mischief. Then I'm going to take the little reindeer antlers and I'm going to add those to the dog that is on the left there. And then I just have a few accessory images. So I'm going to take the second gift and add that over on the left hand side since there was a bigger empty space there. I'm going to take the candy cane and use that to kind of overlap the dog bowl a little bit. And then the ornament is going to go over on the right hand side, kind of on its side there. So now I'm going to bring in all of the letters for my sentiment. And again, because my glue dries really fast, I want to lay out all of the letters and figure out their placement before I start adhering anything. Also, I'm not really great with kind of eyeballing the space without seeing how it's going to look first. So I really need to kind of lay those letters out and figure out the exact placement before I start gluing stuff down. I also am going to take that letter I, like I mentioned, and turn that upside down to be an exclamation point. And just making sure that they are going to be low enough in the scene that I can fit all of the pieces. So I keep adjusting. I am putting that D back behind those antlers to make sure that all of the letters are going to fit in the first part above. And I trimmed down the rest of that sentiment, the part that I heat embossed with one of the Everyday Sentiment banners, and I'm just going to trim that down to size with my Cutter Bee scissors. And I need to have room for that strip up there as well. So just making sure that everything is going to fit, and then I can start to adhere these down. So I'm going to use my EK Success reverse tweezers to help me out with that, just to keep my fingers out of the glue. And it also just kind of helps you not to have your fingers in the way, so you can see the placement of everything a little bit better. I'm not going to have everything lined up completely perfectly. I want it to be a bit whimsical, so it doesn't have to be exactly straight on the top and the bottom. I'm giving some of the letters a little bit of a twist to the left or the right, but I am trying to keep the phrases basically even with each other, so they take up about the same amount of space in the center of the card, you know, from the top line to the bottom line. So we have the same amount of space on the left and the right. So I flipped that I upside down, like I said, to be an exclamation point. So I just need to add the little dot, and the little dog was kind of in the way, so I just had to carefully lift him up a bit I would rather have him forward and the phrase in the back, just like I did with the D behind the reindeer antlers. So it's just overlapping the slightest bit so you can still absolutely see the whole punctuation. So then I'm just going to work my way from the left to the right on the top row, adding in the rest of those letters. Another way that you could add these much more quickly would be to take some post-it tape and kind of line up your letters on the card front and then pick them all up at once, and then you could add the liquid glue to the back all at once. But my post-it tape is getting a little bit low, so I didn't want to waste 2 big strips or even 1 big strip, so I just decided to do it this way. So I have the I next. So I'm going to add that, and then I'll put the little dot above it, just like I did for the exclamation point below. And then, like I said, that last I, I'm going to take and trim down. Just make it a little bit shorter, and then I'm going to glue that down at the end of the howly part so that it makes the little dash line, which kind of mimics the sentiment that is going to go above that happy ho-ho holidays. So I will add some liquid glue to the back of that strip as well, and I decided to put that right in the center of the card at the very top under the stitching detail. And then all that was left was to add a little bit of glitter, so I'm using my favorite Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to add some to the center line on the ornament. And I'll also put some on each of the little light bulbs on that string of lights. And I decided to switch to an older bottle of Stickles that I found in my stash, and it was a little bit thick, so I was kind of struggling a little bit to put it on, but it still looks really nice. So I'm going to add it to the ribbons on the 2 gifts. And then I'm going to very carefully try to dot it into those tiny little buttons on the gingerbread man. Just very, very small amount. And then I also wanted to add it to part of the sentiment. So I'm just going to put it on the lower part of each of the letters, maybe like the bottom third of each of them. And it's just going to give them a little bit of sparkle too and draw your eye. I didn't put it on the dash since it's above the area where I stopped putting it on the other letters. So I just kind of stayed consistent across the board there of how much I went up on each one. And that is going to finish up this card. So I'll lift that up so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had such a blast creating it for you. If you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 12 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good time, and I'll see you soon in another video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.